Pete Golding just landed another elite wide receiver. Say it with me. Portal King.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Stephen Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now it's the number one sports podcast network in America. That is all because of fans like you taking in content like this, and thank you for that. On today's show, we're going to talk about the Ole Miss men's basketball team and their frustrating loss at Vanderbilt over the weekend that kind of left fans shaking their heads. It was one of those nights where the effort was absolutely there, but the execution just simply wasn't quite enough. We'll break down what went wrong there. Next, we turn our attention to Pete Golding, who has quickly established himself as the true portal king. Not only has Ole Miss addressed every major need in the transfer portal, but the Rebels have also successfully retained players that would have been amongst the best in all of college football and would have been at the top of the transfer portal if they decided to leave. It's been an unbelievable first cycle for Pete Golding and his staff. But first, we're going to talk about Ole Miss landing yet another transfer portal commitment in wide receiver Horatio Fields, a highly regarded addition who continues the Rebel strong tradition at that position. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is, and that is your team every single day. This episode is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda puts the same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work that defines you. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. There's more to Mazda because there's more to you. All right, so Ole Miss got a commitment from Horatio Fields. He's a wide receiver that has a unique story. Not a crazy story, anything like that. But in 2024, when Ole Miss played against Wake Forest, he was playing wide receiver for Wake Forest with Deuce Alexander. There's the connection if anybody was looking for that. He ended up transferring to Auburn whenever Auburn just decided to dump a lot of money into the transfer portal because they thought that was the thing that needed to happen. And they just willy-nilly said, hey, we want one of them and all that. And they spent a ton of money in the portal. They didn't get the one position right that they need to get right. They struggled. Horatio Fields was a part of that team. He actually broke his foot in the fourth game of the season and was out for the year. He had 12 catches for about 100 yards up until that point and was one of the starters on the field. So he actually got on the field as well. When he was at Wake Forest, he caught like 40 passes or so for about 600 yards or something like that. About 4 touchdowns, I believe. He was a good player for Wake Forest and was one of the go-tos on that roster, even above Deuce Alexander's, and we saw how talented Deuce is. So when you look at these position players, it was 39 catches, 463 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He's a bigger-bodied wide receiver for John David Baker. And this is important to realize. 6'2", 220. I'm not saying he's Deshaun Stribling. I'm not saying he's Trey Harris. I'm saying that he fits that role as being a bigger body wide receiver that Ole Miss has been famous for essentially since Dante Moncrief was running around in 2011 or so. Ole Miss has been doing this for about 15 years at this point, to where it was Moncrief and then Treadwell, and just one after the another ended up on Ole Miss's roster. Well, Horatio Fields is another one of those players. And when you look at the wide receiver unit that has been brought in, you had to replace Deshaun Stribling. You had to replace Trey Wallace, and you had to replace Caden Lee. Those were non-negotiables. You had to handle that, and you also had to handle the roles that they gave your offense. And Pete Golding and John David Baker, those guys not only did that, they may have upgraded in a couple of positions, at least talent-wise. And Horatio Fields is somebody that could be an elite type wide receiver if he's healthy. When he's on, he's as good as anybody in the country. And if you get what you think you're going to get, it's going to be him and Caleb Cunningham lining up on that outside, and it's going to be absolutely fine. And there's not going to be a single step of a drop off from last year to this year. When you look at the other wide receivers, Darrell Gill Jr. reminds me a lot of Harrison Wallace III. There's a lot of similarities between those players, and it'll be interesting to see what can happen. So you have the Deshaun Stribling type player in Horatio Fields, and then you have the Harrison Wallace III type receiver in Darrell Gill, and then you get Jonte Cook, who I've told anybody that would listen. I've covered the Under Armour All-American game for the better part of the last half decade or so, and very few times have I walked off of those practice fields after seeing it just unbelievably blown away. It has happened twice. One with Zach Branch, who went to Georgia, USC, and then went to Georgia. The other one was Jonte Cook for what he could do and his catch radius and all of that, just completely wowing me what was going on the practice field. That's the wide receiver unit for Ole Miss. And you had Dylan Alford. You had Jace Matthews, who's coming off of a knee injury, but it's 5-star, 5-star, 5-star all over the place on the outside, and a really good player like Darrell Gill and a really good player like Horatio Fields coming in. This wide receiver unit is going to be a typical Ole Miss wide receiver unit. Now, I'm really interested to see Horatio Fields and how the battle with Caleb Cunningham will play out in the course of spring and as they go into fall camp, because David Baker's offense, it's essentially the same thing, but there's a difference between system and structure, okay? The structure of the offense is going to be exactly the same, 100% the same. You're going to have tempo elements. You're going to have the way the plays are called in. The way the structure of the offense is set is going to be the way the structure of the offense is set. The system is what is, you might have a Quinshon Judkins and a Zach Evans, or switch over to what you had this year. The offense could look completely different, but operate exactly the same way. The system is going to change a little bit, in my opinion. I think you're going to see a little bit more two-back offense under John David Baker, but the wide receivers and the tight ends and all of the talent and all of the positions are there. It's going to come down to the knife fight that spring practice is going to be. And by the way, there is no transfer portal until after the football season now. There's no excuse not to have a spring practice. None whatsoever. No excuse whatsoever to not involve the fans in spring football, which is the important part of spring football to me, is involving the fans and fans being able to see what's going on. If not, we're going to have Dalen Flowers. We're going to have people all over the place as it's going on. Whatever they are able to see, we're going to tell you all about as well. But when you look at this wide receiver room, the one thing that was lacking was the big-bodied wide receiver, the replacement for Deshaun Stribling, and Horatio Fields fills that out easily. So Ole Miss at this point has gotten everything that they needed in the transfer portal. I understand that people are going to look at it and say more, but that's not the case. It's basically coming off of zero and just wanting more options, because like we're going to talk about in basketball, sometimes evaluation just doesn't work. I get all of that. But if you look at the talent profile of this football team, the talent of this football team exceeds the talent of the 2025 team, period, bar none. And we will talk about that in just a second, because Pete Golding is and always was the portal king. That's right. He is and always was the portal king. After landing a top 5 transfer portal class and putting a master class in retention this cycle, we're going to break all of that down coming up next. Hey, it's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone has been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It is the perfect way to cap off the season and make sure the Super Bowl is even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, just bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bet if it wins. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, this season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel to get started. Hey, do us a favor, like, subscribe, and comment on the video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcast you're listening to and give it a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps all of this free. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in America. That is all because of fans like you taking in content like this. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Ole Miss with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 per year. Or go to lockedonoleMiss.supercast.com or check out the link down in the show notes to learn more. If you go to the all-access tier, that's $15 a month or $150 a year. You have Mike Huseman's talking about the new coaches changes that's coming in. Corey Burton is breaking down film on opponents and players and things like that. And Dalen Flowers is reporting from Oxford, Mississippi with what is going on. We have a lot of stuff for everybody, and thank you very much for tuning in. All right, so Pete Golding is the portal king. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. And this is how I get there. This is how I made that connection. Pete Golding landed the #2 portal class in the transfer portal this year. And those weren't the most important signings for Pete Golding. We will talk about the players that signed maybe in just a second, but let's talk about retention for a second. It came out in the beginning of January where most everybody signed contracts and Ole Miss was able to keep the large quantity of players that they wanted to keep. The two that they lost was Prince Willem Monmielen, who went to LSU just like TJ Daugherty. But those two were secondary contracts signed by Ole Miss and secondary wants that they wanted. Those weren't the primaries that Ole Miss had to keep, absolutely had to keep. And they batted 1,000 on players they absolutely had to keep. The first one is obviously Trinidad Chambliss. If he went into the transfer portal, he would be #1 with a bullet. He would be a 7-star player. He is likely the Heisman favorite in college football next year after his eligibility gets decided. He is somebody that was brought on by Lane Kiffin. He was recruited for the last month and a half after he decided that he was leaving Ole Miss. You could see him popping up and doing all the fame stuff to try and get him to follow him wherever he went. Unsuccessfully. Another one that Lane Kiffin unsuccessfully tried to get in this roster that is one of the most tampered with in the history of college football, if we're going to be honest about it, is Kewan Lacy. Everybody wanted Kewan Lacy. Everybody. You saw Lane Kiffin doing the same thing, recruiting this player to where he's popping belts and giving it at the end and doing all of this stuff. Hey, we're friends. Yay, like me. All of that stuff. Unsuccessful. Ole Miss was able to close on that one as well. And Lucas Carniero. This is an unbelievably big retention for Ole Miss. He was 31 of 35 last season with a long field goal of 58, and he was 5 of 7 over 50 yards. He is the best kicker in college football. What I just showed you was 3 players that have a legit argument to be the best player at their position in college football. The #1 quarterback, the #1 running back, and the #1 kicker. 3 positions that affect winning. Ole Miss was able to retain all of them. Pete Golding, fabulous jobs, and it doesn't stop there. Ole Miss also was able to get a contract signed of Suntarine Perkins, who last season, everybody's like, well, Suntarine Perkins wasn't the same player. He still had 81 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 12.5 tackles for loss over the course of the season. He also had the interception against South Carolina that you can see on the screen. if you're watching this podcast, that is another thing that he could do, play in the linebacker position. But again, that isn't all. This player, William Eccles, had 68 tackles, 5 sacks, and 11 and a half tackles for loss. This is a guy that over the course of the season developed himself to being the expectation for this season will be Walter Nolan. That is the expectation of Will Eccles. He is the Sugar Bowl defensive MVP of that game and was absolutely a game wrecker going on. Hey, and the rumor is he partially tore his MCL during the season and played through it. Will Eccles is going to be a star on that defensive line with players that came in. That was the retention of great all SEC level players, in some cases the best players in college football, coming back to Ole Miss. Pete Golding and the Grove Collective did a fantastic job of making that happen, and I don't think anybody should overlook that. Now, if you look at some players that came in, the needs, you have Luke Farrelly, the ACC Defensive Player Rookie of the Year, coming in. You have Taj Butler, another linebacker, coming in. Ole Miss did some work at the linebacker position. Unbelievably cool. Tony Mitchell, former five-star player that went to Alabama, ended up going to East Mississippi Community College, transferring to Ole Miss, a safety, kind of a depth piece safety if we're going to be real about it. You got Joshua Dye, a running back that ran for about 1,800 yards over the course of the season in FCS this year. Ole Miss had a run in the transfer portal that was special. You had Jonte Cook. I talked about that a little bit earlier. You had Michael Smith, the tight end out of South Carolina. You had Mekhi Frazier, who is expected to be essentially the backup running back this year with multiple years of eligibility. Tommy Kinsler coming in at offensive tackle, who was projected as somebody that was at least going to play a lot on that Miami offensive line that is really good. Mario Cristobal on the offensive line, really, really good. You can see exactly how it got built by position group and position group. You have Edwin Joseph and Janelle Aguero, the safeties. You have Jay Crawford, who is essentially another Trey Amos clone, to where you can lock out and play man coverage on the outside. Antonio Kite is going to have to fight for the second corner position. So if everything works okay, where you deal with retention and you handle that and you hit on your evaluations this year, this Ole Miss team is easily a top 5 team in the entire country and a threat to win the SEC, the threat to win everything. That is why everybody is just waiting on the NCAA to do the right thing with Trinidad Chambliss. Players getting 7th and 8th years of eligibility, they won't give Trinidad Chambliss a 6th. And a 6th year of eligibility is something that they did back in the 70s and 80s. Now they're given 8th, 9th year of eligibility. It's absolutely ridiculous. That is why Trinidad Chambliss is important. And backing Trinidad up will be Deuce Knight. It'll be nice to have Deuce Knight learn under Trinidad Chambliss and kind of get to become the dude of what's going on, because the way Trinidad plays the game affects Ole Miss offensively, and you saw the points that Ole Miss scored all season long on absolutely everybody. And the talent is there for that to happen again because of the retention efforts and the transfer efforts of Pete Golding. Remember, the Ole Miss combined recruiting and transfer portal class, according to 24/7, is 13th in the country. That is the highest they have been since Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss. In the last 5 years, when they've been on this winning streak, this winning platform that is going on for Ole Miss never reached the heights that Pete Golding did in 2 months. And now you get to recruit off of a playoff semifinal berth. You get to do that moving forward. Yeah, they're going to be okay. And Pete Golding absolutely is the portal king. And they're going to say, oh, but he's not number one. Yeah, LSU signed 50 kids. They had to sign many players because they had to sign many players. They weren't good enough. They have to increase the talent profile. Ole Miss has to retain. And the retention that Ole Miss and Pete Golding and Walker Jones and everybody was able to do is the reason that this Ole Miss team is going to be successful. They're going to talk about the Portal King. I'm going to talk about the Portal King. Everybody's going to talk about what Ole Miss did in the portal. The retention is absolutely massive because there's 3 top 5 players that would have been in the transfer portal and on that list in the top 5 if Ole Miss would have lost them. Ole Miss able to keep them. Ole Miss basically had 3 players in the top 5 in the transfer portal retained on their roster. Absolutely fantastic stuff, and I'm excited to see what happens there. We'll see. All right. In our final segment, we're going to talk about Ole Miss men's basketball dropping another basketball game over the weekend to Vanderbilt, and it's time to kind of acknowledge that this year's portal class didn't quite work out like we hoped it would. We'll talk about all that next. This is Mazda's moving the game forward for those who want to show there's more to the score than what's on screen. AJ Storr moving to a 6th-man position has kind of unlocked this player, and as a result, he has become the unquestioned star of this team. These remind us what it takes to actually raise the bar. It's the extra work off the court, dialing in on every detail, giving it that extra fire, that grit, and I never quit. We put that same passion into every model. Highlights make the real. What it took to get there makes it count. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. If you're interested in a Mazda car, give your local dealer a call and they will be happy to set you up. That's Mazda moving the game forward. So one thing that is interesting, Ole Miss lost the game at Vanderbilt by 2. And for people that didn't watch the game, it kind of went like this. Vandy got out to an early lead like home teams do from time to time. In the first half, it went back and forth. I think Vandy's got out to 12 or 13 points in the first half. They were up by like 7 or 8 at halftime. Ole Miss went on a run, fought all the way back down, and got the ball down 2 points with a chance to take the lead with a 3-point shot. They missed that shot. They got the rebound. They missed the second shot and lost the game by 2 points. It's going to go down as a 2-point loss at Vanderbilt. There's nothing to be ashamed of at all from that loss because Vandy has a really good team this season. But coming off of a Sweet 16 a year ago, it kind of just makes you think a little bit of what that team had versus what this team has. And I don't think any of this blame, other than evaluations and things just not working out, kind of falls on Chris Beard and his staff. I think Chris Beard has been coaching his butt off to try and figure out a way to win games. They're doing the thing where that is about as far as they're trying to figure out this season. Last year, they were trying to get everything ready for the NCAA tournament so they could try and make a run doing that. This year, they're just trying to make it to where they win a basketball game. And Ole Miss has games coming up against Texas A&M and Alabama, and it has a chance where it could get a little bit sideways over the course of these last few games. Really good teams. Heck, you might have G League pros with Alabama playing against Ole Miss, although Ilias Camberdine, I guess, played in the European League and all that as well. But the point is, this has a chance to go sideways on Ole Miss, to where Ole Miss right now is 3-5, something like that. There's 10 games left in the season. Ole Miss has to go 7-3 at a minimum for a chance to make it into March. And when you look at Ole Miss's schedule, you just kind of wonder where those wins are going to come from. Yeah, I can see you beating South Carolina. I can see you beating LSU. And with the weather situation and Ole Miss playing home games in Birmingham right now for women's basketball and a home game getting moved to Memorial Gymnasium in Nashville, it just feels like this isn't the year. I get that. But they're fighting. And the effort they see, it's not a want to issue. Against the Auburn, it felt like a want to issue. It didn't feel like a want to issue against Kentucky. It didn't feel like a want to issue against Vanderbilt. The effort feels like it's there. They're just not making shots. For whatever reason, they're not making shots. And whenever you don't make shots against teams that make shots, the odds of you winning that basketball game is pretty slim. Now, you do have a game against Mississippi State. That's a game you can win. LSU, South Carolina. Like I said, 7-3 has to be a goal at an absolute minimum because of the losses that Ole Miss took in the preseason. I guess you can call it preseason, the non-conference slate of the schedule. But 7-3 is an absolute must, or you're looking at the NIT or the CBI or something like that. Either way, this basketball team will look completely different next season because, for better or for worse, it feels like Ole Miss kind of missed some evals in this cycle. Now, I'm not calling anybody out for what happens. It just happens from time to time. Whenever you live in the transfer portal, there's always a chance that you miss on somebody you absolutely have to hit on. And it feels like at this point, Ilias Carmerdine is not the player that everybody thought he would be coming into this point of the season of this season. Now, AJ Storr has been absolutely fantastic and everything you would want, but there's still problems down with the big men. They were rebounding the ball pretty well early on. That kind of fell by the wayside, and Travis Perry hasn't quite worked out. And there's just problems on one side or another. But, Patton Peekins, he's a baller. He's one of the better freshmen in all of college basketball. And when he's going, Ole Miss kind of goes a little bit. So we'll see over the next 10 games. We'll get ready for baseball season as well. We have Chad Smith and TJ Maloof that are going to give perspectives on Ole Miss baseball this season on the Locked On Ole Miss channel. Two guys that are in pretty good when it comes to baseball. Their baseball knowledge is pretty unbelievable. But we'll talk to them in the coming weeks and months. We'll keep an eye on the basketball thing. Congratulations to Coach Yo for getting the win over Vanderbilt in Birmingham over the weekend. I think they play Auburn on Monday or something like that in Birmingham. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Thanks for tuning in today on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. We're going to continue transfer portal, basketball, baseball talk all week. Make sure you subscribe and follow the show so you get all of the latest episodes. We're on all the social channels, so check that out as well. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get the Locked On Ole Miss podcast ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonolemiss.supercast.com to join the club, and you can go up to the all-access thing and hear from Mike Huseman and Coach Corey Burton and Dalen Flowers as well. For those of you on video, we're going to send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. On audio, make sure you check out a second listen in Locked On College Football or Locked On SEC as well. Hotty toddy, everybody. This is interesting because Ole Miss has about 2 more weeks left that they can play in the transfer portal when originally it was going to stop today. So we'll see how that goes. Hotty toddy, everybody.